Hello, I'm Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so excited to welcome author Mariah Stovall to talk about her novel, I Love You So Much It's Killing Us Both. I Love You So Much It's Killing Us Both is a compelling coming-of-age story set against the backdrop of Los Angeles and New York City. The novel follows Kaki Oliver, a Black woman navigating the complexities of adulthood, friendships, and identity, all through punk music. So we get to know Kaki and see her life as she contemplates rekindling a tumultuous relationship with her former best friend Fiona when she receives an invitation to attend a party for Fiona's newly adopted daughter. So this is a novel of female friendship, music, and how the past influences future possibilities. But listeners, before we get into the episode, pretty please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, leave the show a 5-star rating, and write me a review if you love the show. Now, if you don't know what to write in your review, it's okay. Just give me a 5-star rating, that's a start. And if you want to write something, tell me what episodes were your favorites and what genres you'd like me to read and cover more here on the show. So, thanks in advance. And now onto the episode with author Mariah Stovall. Hi friends, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me to talk about her novel, I Love You So Much It's Killing Us Both, is author Mariah Stovall. Hi Mariah, welcome to the Reader's Couch.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay! I'm thrilled to have you on. Really enjoyed your book. But before we get into the details of what readers can expect and just talking more about the characters, I want to know how you're feeling. I mean, this is your book, baby. It's available in the world. I know you've been seeing the reviews. I'm sure people are talking about the book, so you're kind of seeing that on social media. But how does this moment feel for you as the author?
It feels good. It also feels very busy. So in addition to writing, I do also work a normal 9-to-5 job. And so it's been a lot of sort of juggling the two. And by that, I really mean that right now, a lot of my free time kind of after hours and first thing in the morning is going to the book, which is really nice and exciting. But I am interested to see when things slow down, but I have no complaints.
Oh, I can only imagine it. I'm guessing it sounds like it's a bit of a rush. I know you're busy too. So I'm really excited you've made time to come and chat with us today on the podcast about your book. And on that note, I'd love for listeners to hear it straight from you. Tell us about your book, I Love You So Much It's Killing Us Both. And what can readers expect when they pick up a copy? What's your elevator pitch?
Yeah, so it is a book about friendship, and there is a lot of music happening in the background. It's about the narrator, Kaki Oliver, who receives an invitation from her sort of long-lost former best friend, Fiona Davies, and a lot of the book is told in flashback as you sort of look back on their relationship, figure out what caused this big rift between them, and hopefully along the way, readers will start to form their own opinions about whether these two should pick things up and try to be best friends again.
So the friends we're talking about, Kaki and Fiona, let's talk about them individually. So let's start with Kaki, who right now is living alone, working at a museum, was friends with Fiona, and one day gets an invitation to go to Fiona's baby shower for her adopted daughter. And when that invitation arrives, and it's noteworthy to say they were estranged, and when that invitation arrives, it brings back a flood of memories. So tell us about Kaki, who this character is, what they have going on in their life, and what does their life look like prior to receiving this invitation?
Yeah, so Kaki is she can be hard to I think to get to know at first, but again, the whole book is from her perspective, but she is a very sort of internal person. She feels very kind of at at a remove from everything around her, but she's also at the same time a very keen observer of certain things. So she, has a job where there are some kind of little highlights for her in terms of people watching and one of her coworkers, but she's not excited about kind of moving up the ranks at this museum, but there's not something else that she wants to be doing instead. She, as you said, she lives alone. She kind of goes to and from work and, goes out every once in a while, but puts a time limit on it. She's not, out all night or getting lost in the moment. She's sort of going through the motions almost in her day to day. And she tells herself that she's very happy and content with that sort of life. But again, as you kind of get to know her better, I don't think that's entirely true.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, Kaki gets an invitation from Fiona for her daughter's baby shower, and a flood of memories start to happen. But with that said, while Kaki's deciding, okay, should I go to this baby shower? Should I not go? How do I respond? She ends up creating a mixtape of songs from her childhood. And while kind of creating this mixtape, she starts to just remember their relationship and what life was like in high school. So tell me about Fiona and their friendship back in school, because like you said, the novel goes back and forth. So I'm interested in you sharing with our listeners what Kaki and Fiona's relationship looked like when they were friends before their split when they went to college.
Yeah, so the two of them meet in this sort of, very, very bookish way. Kaki has been hearing Fiona's name here and there. She hasn't been hearing good things about her, but she's nevertheless intrigued. And they meet in the school library one day, and Fiona really tries to pull Kaki out of her shell and is sort of the first person who's able to do that. Kaki is a new student at this school. She's just moved across the country. And so at first, Fiona seems to kind of be the dominant personality and have the upper hand in the relationship, but there does end up being a lot of back and forth in terms of sort of who needs who more and who's getting what from the other, and showing how in some ways they really do complement each other and provide this sort of judgment-free space to deal with all of the issues you would imagine that young women are going through. But at the same time, they can also get a little too wrapped up in their own world and not have as much sort of perspective or common sense as you would hope.
Absolutely. And I think that's a thing with teenage friendship. That's kind of how I just tend to classify it. I know it's general, but when you think about teenage friendship, but also female friendship, it gets to be like that sometimes. And it's also very complicated. I'm really curious, what made you decide to kind of essentially go down this rabbit hole of teenage friendship, which can be all-consuming, which can be toxic sometimes and intoxicating at the same time, and, just all the push and pull dynamics that happen at this tender age?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons. One is just that I think teenagers in general, but especially teenage girls, are just very, very interesting. I think they can be inspiring. I think they can be intimidating. I think they can be really smart. I think they can be really stupid. And I think that, kind of historically, whether it's in literature or in music or other types of art, there has been a lot of space for teenage girls to take up in terms of, different characters we see, but they're not always necessarily taken very seriously. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to write a book that I very much think is primarily an adult book, even though it does have these younger characters for large parts of it. And so there's kind of that in terms of just thinking about where teenage girls kind of fit into our culture and what they can teach us. But I also just think, as you said, that these relationships, especially these female relationships, are so important to explore. And I think especially in kind of contrast to institutions like marriage or just kind of the family structures that we're born into, friendship to me is so special because it's something that you do totally kind of voluntarily and without these, the monetary or social gains that you might get out of a marriage. And so I think there's something really pure and important about it that we can lose sight of as we get older.
Absolutely. I do think looking back at that time, but also examine it, teenagers in present day, even though now we're the adults, it's often underrated. So I love the fact that your novel focused on that. Another thing that you also kind of, mentioned was music, because that's also another pivotal piece of this novel, which is when Kaki gets the invitation and, is there going through her mind, do I want to connect with this person again? Do I want to show up? She goes down the rabbit hole of creating a mixtape. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, that was like the ultimate friendship gift. Mm-hmm. Both, for a platonic friendship, but, if a guy or girl likes you, they make you a mixtape and, you're gifted that. So we kind of see her process things through music, both in the creation of the mixtape, reflecting on like the concert she'd go through. And, you do really kind of get into the punk of it all. Tell me about your decision to use music as a tool in the way that you did.
Yeah, so in many ways, music was actually the starting point for the novel. When I started writing the book or decided to start writing the book, I was a few years removed from many years of very intense music fandom and just being very wrapped up in, as you said, this punk scene and culture. And I had no aspirations to, be a music journalist or anything like that. But as someone who always loved reading, I wanted to see more music depicted in books, and not only, just music as a whole, but music depicted from the fan's perspective rather than, writing a novel about a singer or a band or something like that. And so I kind of wanted an excuse really to just pay tribute to and acknowledge all of these lesser known artists who really impacted my life in a positive way. And then kind of from there, I naturally, again, just thought of, okay, well, what do I want to write about? And it was teenage girls and their relationships. So with all of that, I think it ended up just being a nice pairing of inspirations, and that music is so tied to memory. And as you said, it's so personal in terms of how you kind of exchange it with other people and things like that. So I think it just kind of worked out nicely, but there was some intention behind it as well.
I love that. I really, really love hearing that. And you're right. Music has this ability to kind of bring you back to a time and place. It's like my husband and I will be in a car and, he remembers exactly where he was, like when this song came out or what he was doing at that point in his life. Same thing with me. There are just certain things that stick with you. So, you hear a song, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, this is 20 years old. This is 30 years old. I was doing this, mm-hmm. or I was at this point in my life. So I loved seeing how the music essentially brought Kaki back to that time, because it's something I can relate to in my very own life as well. Just the point of view from a fan. So yes, I thought that was very interesting that you chose to do that. Okay, another thing that I think is noteworthy in this novel as well is a discussion around mental health. We really see Kaki's mental health front and center, from depression, anxiety, also eating disorders. That was a very present theme on the page. Tell me about your intention with that. I know, again, can't talk about teenagers and not cover some of these topics as well. So yeah, really curious about your thought process.
Yeah, so those are kind of, I guess this book was really a grab bag for me, and just in terms of sort of just getting everything that I care about very deeply all in one package. But I am very interested not only in mental health and mental illness in particular, I should say. And again, also just how it's depicted in culture and how these stories, these fictional stories can have a big impact for better or for worse on people's real lives. And so with things like eating disorders and depression and anxiety, I am always excited to see fictional treatments of those subjects. But I did, as I was kind of, reading books to see what was out there, I sometimes felt that a lot of the narratives felt a little too clean or a little too sort of linear in terms of this idea that you know, develop this issue, or it's maybe inborn in you kind of just from the beginning. And then you either get treatment or you don't, and you either get better or you don't. And I think that the reality for a lot of people is so much more complicated than that, in terms of having to try different things, or maybe, you know, trying something and then having to take a break for financial reasons or something like that, and then maybe trying something different down the line. So I wanted to really think about how these things impact people in a way that might not necessarily fit into a very clean, straightforward beginning, middle, end that we're used to having to put our stories into. So that being said, there is I think a clear beginning, middle, end of this novel, but I think the way that it's written hopefully emphasizes this idea that yes, it can be very hard and take a lot of different strategies and go around to get a handle on these really complicated conditions that people are dealing with.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I think you balanced it well with the narrative. So it's infused throughout the novel. You know, it's palpable. You can see it, you can feel it. But it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't, you know, done recklessly. I felt the care through each page, especially as, you know, we learn more about Kaki and just also her feelings surrounding everything and in relationship to her friend, which again, ultimately, I feel this is a novel of friendship. We get the teenage version, then we see the adult version and just the expectations and friendship breakups, because this is also a novel about friendship breakups, feeling regret, feeling all consuming, but then also kind of feeling neglected at times and feeling resentment when your friend doesn't come visit you in college, which again is also something that happens carrying friendships from high school through to college. So I really think this is it's a grab bag filled with everything, this book. So
thank you.
Yes, I think you've checked so many boxes. But with that said, I'm curious now. Who was your favorite character in the novel? Who was maybe the character you connected with the most, or the character you enjoyed discovering as you were writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't gotten that one yet. I don't know if favorite is the right word, but I do want to give a shout out and give some acknowledgement to Fiona. I think that it's very easy, I think, to, you know, maybe see her as a villain and see Kaki as a victim. And I'm not going to say that, you know, Fiona doesn't do some questionable and maybe outright bad things to Fiona, but I don't know. I think Kaki does a lot of the same things right back to her, and that if we were getting the story from Fiona's perspective, things might look a little different. So I think that I'll just say Fiona's not perfect, but I still do think she's, you know, not totally evil or irredeemable or anything like that. And if nothing else, I hope she's at least, you know, entertaining and keeps the reader engaged.
I will say she kept me engaged. She is my definition of an unlikable character. So you probably won't like her too much off the bat, but I think once you get to know her a little, get, you know, slivers of her side of the story, it helps to make things round. It completes it. So I think she serves a great purpose. So I see the villain role bit, but I think she's very much needed in the story too, even though we tend to, and like I did for most of this conversation, focus on Kaki.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that she is, you know, pulling her weight within the story.
Yes.
And on the other side of that, I think it was a lot of the love interests, a lot of the male characters were a little bit harder for me to write, or maybe sometimes less fun for me to write, because I think for them, my instinct was to make them very villainous, just sort of full stop, or very unlikable. But as I went through drafts of the novel and got really smart feedback from astute readers, I realized that even if there is this idea that kind of Kaki very much has a type, that I still needed to differentiate those characters and have them have enough of, you know, positive qualities, or what she would see as positive qualities, to make the reader willing to put up with them as well.
Yes, yes, they pull their weight too. Yeah, they definitely pull their weight too. So yeah, I love hearing that feedback that early readers gave. That's awesome. So let's get into your writing life a bit. I'm curious. Now that this book is out here in the world, are you working on any other projects? What can we expect?
Yes, I have. I was just working last night on a freelance assignment, an essay that kind of reads to different horror films within the context of the body and sickness. So that's a short piece that should be online in the next month or so. But in terms of books, for a very long time, or I should say a very long time ago, as I was trying to get I Love You So Much published and off the ground, I did start writing another book to kind of keep myself distracted and give myself something else to obsess over. And that novel is one that I still need to finish, but I think I know how it's going to end. I do have a good chunk of it written down. And that one is a sort of psychological horror novel of sorts. It's about a haunted apartment and the couple living in it, and their life starts to fall apart when there's not really a lot of food available to them, and the food that they are able to get starts to rot and brings this fly into the house that kind of ends up becoming a turning point for the dynamic between the two people in this relationship.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's exciting. Where will your piece that you were working on, where will that be featured so readers can go check it out?
Yes, that will be up on Electric Literature. I
Oh,
think it's either electriclit.com or maybe it's electricliterature.com. I can't remember.
okay. Well, when this episode goes live, I'll be sure to link it in the show notes. But you also had a previous book, Black Punk Now. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so that is a really cool anthology of interviews and comics and fiction and all sorts of things that was edited by James Spooner, who was the founder of the Afropunk Festival, and Chris L. Terry, who is a really talented writer as well. And James also is a graphic novelist. And so I was lucky enough to have an editor who knew about the project kind of flag it for me as something that I would probably be a good fit for. So I submitted a short story, and Chris and James ended up wanting to feature it within the anthology. So my short story is called The Princess in the Pit, and it's a retelling of both Rapunzel and a West African folktale called How Anansi took Oso as his wife. And it, as you can probably guess, involves some punk characters as well. But that is a really wonderful full anthology with so much variety, and obviously is great for kind of community building for people of color within the alternative rock space.
Okay, now I'm excited because I've never read that anthology, but I got excited when you said retelling because I love a good retelling. Loved Rapunzel, but more importantly, Anansi, because I grew up on those Anansi stories from my grandmother. So, okay, I'm excited. Okay, so let's get into your reading life real quick because even though we're here to chat about your book, I Love You So Much, It's Killing Us Both, I want to know what you're reading. So share with our listeners the last book or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
Yes, I will say that my day job that I mentioned earlier is that I do work in book publishing. And so a lot of the things I read are things that aren't books yet, that, may be books in the future. So I don't have as much time as I would like to read published work. But I do know off the top of my head that the last novel I read is Y/N or Your Name by Esther Yee, which is a really sort of bizarre, and I mean that in the best possible way, story about a woman who gets sucked in to K-pop fandom. And, again, fandom, we know I'm a fan of fandom, and she kind of follows her favorite idol across the world and doesn't kind of get the results that she was hoping for. But it's really beautifully written prose, which is always so exciting for me to see. And on the nonfiction end, I'm drawing a bit of a blank on the last nonfiction book that I finished, but I am in the middle of reading a book called Two Wheels Good by, I believe the author is Jordy Rosen, and it's a history of the bicycle. And I'm not a car person. I'm a bike person and a walk on my 2 feet person. So that has been fun to read about.
Ooh, how exciting. And I love that you mentioned YN because I love that book.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Absolutely love that book. It's one of my favorites from last year. It's in my top 10 of 2023. So if you even need more endorsement for that book, go listen to that episode because I loved it. And what would you say was your favorite childhood book that you can remember?
Yes, that is a great question. I think a little bit of an unusual reader as a child in that I kind of just read whatever was there. I think I just wanted to like see the lay of the land and I didn't like, stick with a lot of series or anything like that. But I do remember the one author who, I will say that I know his kind of personal life and beliefs were certainly far from perfect. But Roald Dahl was someone who I was really interested in kind of reading everything that he wrote. And there is a book of short stories of his that I think is lesser known. I don't see it talked about very often. It's called Skin. And there are some really kind of dark and creepy stories in that book. And it's always stuck with me as something that, again, is really beautifully written, but kind of pushes you to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yes, yes. And I couldn't agree with you more with Roald Dahl. Perfect description, Didn't always have the best views, but great books. I went down the rabbit hole and I happened to know Skin and other
Oh,
stories.
great.
So, yeah. It was a collection when I read it. So, so, so good. So I'm a fan. But what books are you looking forward to reading in the year ahead?
Yes, I'm actually, as you ask me, I'm looking behind me at my shelves where there's so much to be read. Let me see. Oh, someone recommended Penance by Eliza Clark to me, and I've been meaning to read Eliza Clark. I know Boy Parts seemed like it would be right up my alley, so I'm very excited to check out hopefully both of those novels. And there's also, let me see what else I'm excited about. Oh, my mom very highly recommended the memoir How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair to me, and I've heard nothing but great things about it, so I'll have to check that out too.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really great book, How to Say Babylon. And I love Eliza Clark too. So
Oh,
two for
great.
one, two for one, two for one there. On the show, we also love indie bookstores. So share with our listeners your favorite local indies.
Yes, absolutely. I'll shout out two of those, or actually three. So there are two in my hometown of Montclair, New Jersey. One is Watch on Booksellers, which very graciously hosted me for the launch of I Love You So Much. And they have a great selection of new books. And then there's another bookstore in town called Montclair Book Center that has a great selection of new and used books. And they also have some vinyl records and other media there. And I also really love, oh gosh, I just forgot the name of it. You know what? Scratch that. I'll just say, those are my top two hometown indies.
Awesome. So getting back to your novel, I Love You So Much, It's Killing Us Both. One, that's a mouthful of a title. But, but what are you hoping for in an ideal world? Now that your book is out there in the world, when a reader picks up a copy and they've turned the last page, what are you hoping readers might think or feel or maybe want to discuss once they've reached the end?
Yeah, I think that once people reach the end, first of all, I would just be thankful that they stuck it out. And I'm hoping that they are thinking about and excited to talk about just the allowances that we make for ourselves and for each other. So I think that my characters intentionally are very imperfect and they're probably going to make decisions that are frustrating or, baffling or maybe just plain wrong. But I do think that they're allowed to make those mistakes and hopefully learn from them. But I really appreciate people who are willing to engage with the idea that you don't have to like a character or agree with everything that they do in order to, give them the time of day.
Absolutely. And readers, like I said earlier, this book checks all the boxes. I absolutely enjoyed it. You're going to get the friendship, again, teenage friendship, past, you get flashbacks also to the future. We see whether or not they can move forward together or they're just going to have to stay estranged. But I really enjoyed this one. Highly recommend it. I hope you'll pick up a copy. And Mariah, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you too. This was really fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.